think we're complete. Welcome, everyone. I'm Sibbe Heijne. I work for Devotion. You may have seen the stand at the end there with the pinball machine. I've been a frontender for the past 10 years, and for the past 5 years, I've done consultancy. Recently, about a year ago, I was working for a client, Technische Unie, and they had a beautiful view application, single-page application, that they... Oh, wait 1 sec for those people to come in. Right. They built a beautiful view application, a single-page application that they originally made as a POC, and then they were so happy about it that they were like, okay, let's ship it to production. And by the time they reached production, they realized, oh, but we need SEO, and the user experience is not fantastic. So they wanted to implement server-side rendering. And just to make sure that everyone is on the same page, server-side rendering is basically taking a web page, creating the HTML on the server, sending that to the browser, and then from there you can add JavaScript to it or whatever. And from a kind of a modern perspective, what we usually do is we take a view application, we render that to a string on the server, and then we hydrate it in the front end or in the browser. So instead of typically mounting it, rendering an empty page, then starting to generate the full application, we already do some work on the back end. That's kind of what we're going to be doing today as well, because in a lot of those cases where you want to start server-side rendering your application, you don't really have the luxury to say, hey, I need a framework for it. And in order to do that, I need to migrate, I don't know what's happening, migrate the complete application from framework A, or maybe you don't have a framework like we had at Technische Unie, to whatever, next, whatever floats your boat, solid. I'm hoping my screen is going to work because I need it in a sec. Aha. Oh! Nice, awesome, thanks. Brilliant. Right, so nowadays it's actually pretty easy to do this without actually having to migrate to another framework. You can use what you have now. Maybe you're just doing magic stuff with jQuery, or maybe you're using Vue or React, probably for a lot of people. Because since a few years we use Vite a lot. And for those of you not familiar with it, it's a build tool that basically makes it very easy to build front-end applications, usually single-page applications, but they also provide amazing API to develop your own kind of hybrid applications, or in our case, what we're going to do is make a multi-page application with one page. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing. I'm going to show you how you can take your current app and start rendering that on the server with very minimal effort, so you don't have to spend years, months, whatever, migrating, reinventing the wheel, etc. So let's get into that. Right now I have this page, and for some context, this page is just a simple index file. It has everything hard-coded in it, and Vite is sending this to the browser. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to slowly start replacing and adding stuff where the to-do is. Basically, different frameworks, render them on the server, and start hydrating them in the browser. To give you a small idea, or a little idea, about what this application currently or will look like, we're going to have a couple islands. We're going to have the intro that you already see on the page, and we're going to have a couple counters, one with vanilla, one with Vue, one with Svelte, one with React. I'm cheating a little bit, so you might notice I have to look there to type because I have some other things here on my screen. Hope that's not too distracting or is going to cause any problems. And finally, we'll have a shared store that will share data between these different apps, so the View app, the Svelte app, etc. And the way that we're going to be doing this is by creating a Vite plugin. And we're going to add that to our application. And that will kind of do the heavy lifting for us. We'll also create a very small server that with a single request handler that will be responsible for rendering well, each of these apps, basically the whole page. And each of those islands will have 2 entry points, one for the client, one for the server. We'll get into why that's needed in a little bit. So to start off, I have... Oh. This is harder than I thought. We have this beautiful little intro section. Now what I want to do is I want to take this HTML and I want to start serving it from a server. But right now, all Vite does is serve the index HTML, and there's no way for us to kind of dynamically render anything or whatever. That's the part where our plugin will come in. So there are different ways to do it. I like using a plugin for this because it enables you to integrate a little bit better with Vite. It opens a lot of doors for you, and it saves a little bit in terms of complexity when you use it. Because what we'll be doing is simply using the typical Vite commands, Vite dev, Vite build, Vite preview. We won't have to add anything else. The only thing is that when we start running in production, we'll have a separate entry point that we start, and it'll just work. So what we'll start off doing is create a little entry point for our intro. And our intro will be static. There will not be any client-side JavaScript involved. We'll simply say, OK, I want a server entry, and this will return a function or export a function that will render our HTML. And now I believe that I have, yes, this here, so I can copy it. I don't want to focus too much on what we're actually rendering, because it's to some extent, it's not very important for our little story here. This could be anything. It could be dynamic. You could base it off whatever you wanted. Now we have this, but nothing is happening with it. So we will have to start doing some heavy lifting. And what I have here is a little boilerplate. Oh, wrong editor.
Can you increase the font a bit?
Is that readable for everyone? Yeah, yeah, you're quite far back there. Right. So what I have here is a little bit of a boilerplate for my Vite plugin. We'll do a couple things. We'll start off creating a little plugin, doesn't do anything, and then slowly we start adding behavior. We'll set up the development server, we'll set up the preview server, and our build as well. And we'll have a little manifest, which is essentially our index.html, where we'll have some custom code that we process and can use to determine our entry points. So the first thing we can do is install this little plugin in our Vite application. And to use it, we'll need a Vite configuration, and we'll have to provide it with our plugin. We'll come to that in a second. Right. Oh. Right. For some reason, the language server is complaining that it doesn't know the application. Let me just check that we actually have it. We do not. And I'm going to be using, for some context, I'm going to be using Bun to install stuff. I'm also going to be using it to load files. This is not because we need it. You could do this with Node, npm, pnpm, doesn't matter. It's just, it makes things a little bit simpler. And you'll see that later on when we start making the server that, yeah, it makes life a little bit easier. So now, I'm not sure actually if I export anything from my plugin, so let's check that first. No, we do not. So before we run into errors, let's see if everything is running. Okay, so now nothing is happening. We're still going to be seeing the same old page that we have, but now we can start adding things. And this is where stuff will start getting a bit interesting. We're going to structure this a little bit, just because it makes it easier to kind of keep track of what's happening, what logic belongs where, etc. And we'll have a couple stages in our plugin. For those of you not familiar with this, when you create a Vite plugin, you can return an array of different plugins. And these can work together to kind of get stuff done, so to speak. Dev. And finally, So we'll basically have 4 plugins. One will be to kind of set up some configuration, store some global variables. One will be to set up the dev server, and the final one will be to do some compile time stuff for us. And the first thing that we'll be doing is setting up the dev server so that we can start developing, start doing stuff. For me, this is one of the more important things that we will need, because I like to have a nice and easy kind of developing experience. So what we'll do is we'll create a little function that will allow us to set up basically a request handler that we can use within Vite inside the dev server, and that we can also later use, well, with similar logic anyways, in our production server. Does this? Oh, that also impacts it. That's too bad. Right, so maybe we should take a step back. Right now we have our index file. And in our index file, we have this hard-coded HTML. But what I would like to do is say I want to make an island. And I want to pass a path to it. And I want to use this to automatically determine my, my entry points. In this case, it will only be a server entry point. So somehow we need to parse this and tell Vite, hey, this is something you need to load, and this needs to be processed. And that's part of the heavy lifting that we'll be doing in that plugin. So when we start a server, or when we start Vite, we have a hook that's config. This will get some, well, the initial configuration. It will get the config environment. We'll get into that later on when we do the build. But for now, what we can do is we can start making a manifest. And so that we can use that later on in our server. this hook, the server instance here, is the connect server, the HTTP server that the dev server uses to run everything. So this will host your static files, this will process the index.html, etc. And there are two things that you can do. You can just do stuff to the server here, or you can return a function to make sure that whatever the server does, it does it first, and then we do things. And we want to have our little dev server here and use it as middleware in our connect server. Let's call this Vite, more clear. Right. So now what we have to do is we have to generate somehow some kind of data that we can use to determine what we need to render, and we need to create some middleware that will actually handle requests for us. And let's do that. I cheat a little bit. I'm very familiar with regular expressions, but this is a little bit tricky, so I thought, let's put that in there beforehand. Basically, what it will do, it will find all the islands that we add to our index file, and it'll allow us to extract the attributes from it as well. This file or this function will accept the parameters, so we know where the file is, and we don't have to hard code these paths all over the place. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to try and load this file. This is what I was talking about. This is a function from bun. What this will do, it will load the file, or it will read the file in a sense. And when we call the text function, it will start loading it. And we'll get it back as a string so that we can start doing things with it. And first, we'll start by finding all the HTML tags, the islands that we're looking for. And this is where our little regular expression comes in. Once we have those tags, we can start kind of creating our data structure. Am I typing that right? And we can start processing each of them. Basically, we'll take the full HTML and we'll kind of use that as a value to cache the parts that we process, and we'll take the attributes out of it so we can read some information from it. Later on, this will be important because we'll add an option that will allow us to, in the manifest, say, hey, we want to hydrate this, or we don't want to hydrate this, so that we can determine at runtime or at build time, I mean, what we want to populate or what we want to hydrate and what we don't. This kind of HTML attributes that we have there, this is the full string, excluding the HTML tag that contains all the HTML attributes. And if we split that up with a space, we can get the key and the value of each of those. And just to be sure, we'll remove all empty values that we have, in case we have double spaces or whatnot. And finally, we can get there's a syntax error in here somewhere. Am I blind?
I think a parentheses at the end, too much.
Okay, I'll get back to that in a sec. I can check it. That's fine. First, let me continue this. We can split each of the HTML attributes at the equal sign, and that will allow us to get both the key and the value out of it. Not all attributes will have a value. Some of them will be empty. For example, when we are going to hydrate or add the option to hydrate islands, we will add an empty hydrate attribute. So we can already start filtering those off. And if we indeed don't have a value, we will just set it to true because the property is there or the attribute is there, but it does not have a value attached to it. Now I need to fix this. Oh, I see. We're not iterating over the tags. I'm sorry. So, of course, in order to get all this data, we need to start looping over our tags so we can actually do something with it. And then we can take all this information that we just collected and add it to the islands attribute, object. So we can say, okay, I have my island, take the full HTML of my island, use that as a key, and then pass all the data that we just collected to it. So we can use that in the server. And this will have a couple properties. One of them is the source, just for convenience, but these are more important. We'll have an attribute server. This will point to the server entry. You might notice I hate where the accolade is positioned on a MacBook. I don't know if anyone has these struggles as well, but right. And finally, we'll get to this later, but just for convenience sake, we'll also have a hydrate option here. And this will say whether or not we want to hydrate our islands, essentially. So we have all this information, and if we return this, we can start using it in our plugin. So that was a little bit of a detour. This is just so we can parse the index HTML, and that we can then fetch it here. And then in turn pass it to our little server there. Oh, and for all of these plugins to share it, I of course need to define an actual variable that holds it. Right, so let me restart my server just to check that I don't have errors. I do. Let's see, expected file path. Oh, yes, of course, of course. This is always the part that I like most about live coding sessions, is there will be bugs. And you can see me solve it. So in this case, what we were missing was the actual path to load. So in this case, that will be the index file, the same one that Vite usually uses. I like to keep things close to the way that they are by default, so to speak. For those of you not familiar, resolve is a function that will allow us to, from the current working directory, resolve a path, so we can get the full path, the absolute path of the file. Now, this is a more tricky one. Let's see if we can figure out what's wrong. Oh, I know. Okay, so this it's a bit of an obscure error, but this is correct because we're not returning any function yet from our development server. So right now what we can do is we can start creating the actual handler. that will start rendering stuff, do things. The magic doesn't happen here. This is just kind of a layer where we will take the entry points, run a server called render, and then each of those entry points will have their own responsibility to actually render the things that we need. That will in turn allow us to not lock in to a specific vendor, framework, library, whatever you want to call it. This is always a little bit weird because what Vite does, it overrides the URL in the request and takes the original URL, puts it in the original URL, and then it will always point to the index.html. But we want to serve a render. So in this case, we won't have a router, but if you do, this is useful to know. And there are a couple of things that we're gonna do here. First off, we're gonna load the actual template. And you may have noticed I passed the development server into this function so that we can use it here because we want Vite to process the index.html. So if we have a source file in there, a CSS, JavaScript, whatever, it can process it. It knows that it's there. We can kind of pass it along and we don't have to do anything with it. And same thing here, using the API from one to load the file. Now we can start looking for our rendered islands, or for our islands in this template. And we can take the entry points that we have from our manifest and start rendering them. There we go. In here we have some entries, the key of which was the HTML from the island, basically the descriptor that we had, and the value is the data that we just created. And we can use this information to load the endpoint, or the entry, I'm sorry. And this is a nice little function that you get from Vite. This allows you to load your application, process it with Vite at dev time. So normally you would try to import a TypeScript file and it would completely fail because you need to process it. This will make sure that Vite does all that for you, which will in turn give us the render function that we defined. And again, we can return the result of that render function, including the HTML, so that later we can look it up quite easily. And here we turn it back into a nice little object. Now all we have to do is take our template and process it. We can look for all the islands that we have in there. We can use that same island pattern that we used before. And for each match that we find, return the rendered HTML. Finally, this is all the magic, basically. This will also in production, this is about what we'll do. Main difference being that we don't have to do some of the heavy lifting, and we'll have to serve our static files on our own. So we can start returning a response. Let the browser know that it's an HTML file that we're returning, and finally send the data that or the HTML that we just generated. One final thing that is very useful to do is whenever an error throws, we can pass that to Vite. And Vite can kind of, based on source maps and those kind of things, give us a better stack trace. So that whenever the error throws, it doesn't throw here, but it throws in the actual place where it was thrown, if that makes sense. And when we've done that, we can just pass it on to the server. This will allow Vite to show us this beautiful little error page that you usually get when an error is thrown. Now, hopefully, it's always a bit of a question, of course, we'll see the same page that we saw before. My laptop is struggling with this, apparently. Let's see, it might be that we're not ending the request, so it's never actually doing anything to... Let's see, in our plugin, we're returning the dev server, using it as middleware. But we're not getting a response. Oh, it finished now. So perhaps something else is going wrong. No, it's hanging. Okay, let me check. Let's make sure that we're actually getting the HTML that we're expecting here. Ah, I see, I made a typo. Which is why, of course, language servers are very useful, and if you have proper type support. Right, so now this is supposed to arrive here in a beautiful little overlay, but something is going wrong, so let's see what this error is mentioning. Oh, that's nasty. Let's see, so somewhere in our application, something is going wrong, it seems. So let's see what we're doing here.
You're not consuming the island in your Vite SSR module.
What do you mean?
In your server, you deconstruct match and island, but you're not consuming island. I don't know if that's something online. Well, I lost.
Yeah, the lines change.
In the second block on line 1, you load your SSR module, but...
Oh, yeah, okay, so we're not passing a path. That's too bad. This should be the island server entry, if I remember correct. Beautiful, okay, so. Right. So this is most of the heavy lifting that we did now. The main thing is that this doesn't do anything. This doesn't load any JavaScript or anything like that. So looking at the time, I would also like to have a little counter here, and let's add the vanilla one first, just to keep things simple. because yeah, we could hydrate this, but it doesn't really do anything. So let's add a server entry, and we'll also add a client entry. In the server, we'll basically do the same thing. And that should give us a nice little, oh, we need to add it to the manifest, of course. We can take this same island, change the path to, what is it, counter vanilla. Return the HTML from it, and then we should be able to see our pretty little counter, but something is going wrong somewhere again. So let's have a look and see where things are going wrong. So we're doing the same thing, just in a different place. Let's make sure that everything is typed correctly. This is too bad. Because we're doing everything right here. It already works. We're already loading the island, so let's see if the island is... Oh, wait, let me see. I know what's happening here. I have to restart the server. So there are tricks that you can do to, even when you change things in your plugin, do the hot reloading, but typically that's not really necessary, so I thought, let's not divert too much, and there the counter is. Now, what we also want is we want a client entry. And I'm just going to copy paste this real quick. This will basically, in a very traditional sense, do some stuff with the DOM, add click handler, etc., and that will allow us to then click on this. If I can find my mouse. Oh, I see. So right now, we added that little option to hydrate, and right now we're not doing that. Because we don't, in the case of the intro, we don't have a client entry, but in this case we do. So what we can do is we can pass the hydrate option, and then that should add the HTML to us, for us. There's one step that we're missing though. Because right now we're not saying anywhere that we actually want this JavaScript to be added to our HTML, and that is definitely something that we need to do. Otherwise, Vite has no idea, the browser has no idea where all this is coming from. So in our plugin, we'll add a hook. This is something that runs both at compile time, or both for the dev server at compile time as for the production build. So we're going to add it to our compile plugin. And you might notice that this transform index HTML matches the function that we're calling in the server. And now, if our island has a hydrate flag, oh, apologies. We want to make sure that this gets executed before Vite processes the file, which is why we're passing this as an object, and that object needs to have a handler. And then we get valid HTML. Now, there are different things that you can do. You can return just the HTML that you process, so you can do replace you can replace things in it, or what you can do is you can add a list of tag descriptors, which looks kind of like this. We say we want a script tag. We want to add some attributes. We want it to be a module. We pass the client entry, and we want to inject this to the body. Which would automatically append the files for us. I think I made a little mistake somewhere, setting this to, where's my manifest? I think this needs to be false. Because otherwise we're trying to load a client entry that doesn't exist, of course.
Maybe you need to define on the island that you need hydration.
Oh, didn't I add it?
I didn't think so.
I could swear I just did that. Maybe I didn't save the file. That could be. No, maybe it's a good place to start because maybe I didn't save the file. Let's see if we're actually getting the client entry here. Let's see if it's actually loading something. I have to lean over very far. Oh, there. Ah, it's empty. Did I save the client entry? That's a good question. We started a little bit later, so I'm going to let this run out about 5 minutes. I hope you don't mind. If you have somewhere to be, please feel free to leave in a minute. Let's see if we're actually getting something now. Ah, there's our JavaScript. So now we have this pretty little thing. So from here, things should start getting a little bit simpler. I'll take the svelte counter as an example. And because this is something I'm a little bit more familiar with. Basically, every single framework that you know will provide you with the tools to do this kind of thing. So we'll be able to render the HTML somewhere to a string, to a stream, whatever. Svelte does this as well through the render function. Now I got to cheat. For 1 second, just to make sure that things go smoothly. Because I'm using the latest version of Svelte, which is not released yet, and they changed the way that these properties are called. And this is not going to work. So we'll call this render as, or render Svelte component. So it doesn't have a conflict with the render function that we're exporting. We'll pass our counter to it, and I'm hoping it's going to take the actual, no, the right one. Normally, we can also pass some props or whatever. This is pretty similar for any framework that we have. And it will allow us to load data on the server, for example, pass it to the application. For this to work, we do need the actual Vite Svelte plugin. And this is the nice thing, is that all these frameworks nowadays have the plugin for Vite, and that will handle all of the processing for you of the files, etc. Let's make sure this is restarted. And that should take care of our server entry. In this case, we're only returning the body. It will be possible to return the head here. I hope that the kind of impression is clear. This simplifies things a little bit for us. And then in the server or in the client, we're going to do the same thing. So right now, if I add this in here, but we don't hydrate it, I hopefully I'm so used to files saving when I
If you use $WA, then it saves all.
I'm used to the file saving when I alt tab. Let's see if this is actually being called. Oh. And indeed, just to be sure, let's check this. Render is not a function. Am I doing this wrong? Oh. Apologies. Make sure. My gamble is going to be, no, it's synchronous.
Maybe the client?
This should not actually do anything. Let's see. This is also a little bit odd. It's a shame that so many things are going wrong today. I hope you all don't mind. Let's see.
Your linter complains about Svelte or counter Svelte being empty.
You mean the little error here? Yeah, I don't have a type definition ready for Svelte files, so that should be that should be expected. Let me put it like this. Let me just to make sure. Copy it from here and see if that makes a difference. Oh, I did a named export, didn't I? That's too bad. Yeah. Yeah, this means that things are starting to get together or come together. And there is our little Svelte counter. It's funny how when you try to show that something is simple, it ends up not being very simple. And finally, let's make sure that it actually hydrates, because this is kind of the fun stuff. So Svelte also provides a hydrate function. And let's not fall for that one again. If we take our little counter. In here, we're not using any, as you may have noticed for the vanilla version, we don't use any kind of function here because this just runs. And let's make sure that I actually type this right because this is the container. So we take that same component, we pass it to our, I need to enable hydration. And because this doesn't reload every time that we do the thing. And now you can see that whenever I click it, it does updates. You may also notice that there's a shared counter that interacts between the two different apps, let's call it that. And it might be interesting to show you how I do that. And after that, I think I'm out of time. Because I really like this about Vue. Vue has the reactivity API. The reactivity API uses signals, and you can use this in any framework. It's a very small library. I import it from Vue here because I already have it, but you can import it from @Vue reactivity API. This is a difficult word. API as such, and you'll only have these small little parts. It's only a few kilobytes. Your end users won't really notice it, and you will be able to use this, subscribe to these changes, and update your app accordingly. For example, I'm also using this in the vanilla app to whenever these values change, that it will also update the UI. So a lot of things went wrong, and sadly I wasn't able to get to building it for production, which is also fairly simple. Essentially what that would be is you run the build twice. So when the build runs, you run it again, once for the client and once for server-side rendering. It's a flag, simple flag that you turn on. It will generate two different entry points, and you can use that manifest that we generated to also load those same files from the bundle output, essentially. So I hope that this was a bit clarifying for people. I'm a little bit sad that I wasn't able to do everything because a lot of things went wrong. But to me, this does show that you do not need to put a lot of work in refactoring your whole application just to get something like this done. So I hope it's helpful. If you have questions, please find me outside. I'll probably be at the devotion stand. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.